Once there was a woodcutter with two children and their stepmother. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. They lived so poorly that sometimes there was not even anything to eat. And then one evening he lay in bed, pondering how to feed the children further. His wife advised him to have children in the forest, light a fire, give a piece of bread each and leave them there, not all four of them die of hunger. But the woodcutter did not agree. And until then, his wife persuaded him that he finally agreed. And the children, because of hunger, also could not sleep and heard everything that their stepmother said to their father. And when the parents fell asleep, Hansel secretly rushed out of the house. The moon was shining brightly, and the white stones glittered like coins. Hansel pocketed as many of them as he could fit. Then he returned home and the children went to bed. In the morning, the stepmother came to the children, gave each of them a piece of bread, and they all went to the forest together. On the way, Hansel threw out white stones one by one. When they arrived at the clearing, my father began to light a fire. He ordered the children to sit near the fire and make sure that it didn't go out, while they and their stepmother would go for more firewood. They sat, tired, and fell fast asleep. When the children woke up, it was a dark night all around. And when a full month had risen in the sky, Hansel took his sister by the hand and went, looking for the way through the pebbles, which glittered like new coins, and showed them the way. They walked all night long, and at dawn they came to their father's house. Some time passed, and the children again heard how the stepmother one night began to beg their father to get rid of the children. He refused, but his wife did not want to listen to him. She cursed and expressed all sorts of reproaches to him. When the parents fell asleep, Hansel, like the last time, wanted to collect stones, but the stepmother locked the door and the boy could not leave the house. Early in the morning, the children were given a piece of bread each, even less than the previous time. On the way to the forest, Hansel shredded his piece in his pocket and threw the crumbs on the ground. The stepmother took them even further into the forest. Again a big fire was lit, and the father ordered the children to watch the fire while they and their stepmother chopped some more wood. When lunchtime came, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel. And they fell asleep. We woke up when the dark night fell. And then a month came up, and they got together on their way, but they could not find a single crumbs, because thousands of birds fluttering in the forest had long been eating those crumbs. So the children walked for a very long time, but they could not get out of the forest. Suddenly, the road led them to the hut. Coming closer, the children saw that the house was all built of bread and biscuits, and the windows were made of pure sugar. Hansel reached up and broke off a piece of the roof, while Gretel went to the window and began gnawing at its windows. And then the door in the hut opened wide, and the old woman came out, leaning on a crutch. Hansel and Gretel were so scared that they even dropped their tidbits from their hands. And the old woman was kind and invited them to her hut. There was already abundant food on the table: milk, cookies, apples, and nuts. After dinner, the old woman made 2 clean beds for the children, and Hansel and her sister thought they were in heaven. But the old woman only pretended to be affectionate, but in fact she was an evil witch, who built her bread hut for this purpose in order to lure children. Early in the morning, while the children were sleeping, she took Hansel and put him in a small cage. And she ordered her sister to do everything that the wicked witch demanded of her. The old woman decided to fatten the boy in order to eat him later. So Gretel began to cook the most delicious food for Hansel, and she herself got nothing but leftovers. Some time passed, and the boy did not get fat. Then the old woman did not want to wait any longer, and decided to cook and eat Hansel. She ordered Gretel to light the stove and apply water. When the stove warmed up, the old woman ordered her to climb into the stove and see if it was hot enough. So she wanted to push the girl into the fire and bake her. But Gretel knew what was on her mind. She said that she did not know how to get in there, and asked the witch to show herself. The old woman got angry and climbed into the oven. Then Gretel pushed her and slammed the shutter behind the witch. Wow, how terribly the old woman hauled them. Gretel, meanwhile, rushed to Hansel and opened the cage. Having freed their brother, they went to the witch's room, in which there were boxes of pearls and precious stones in all corners, filled their pockets with them, and went home. For several days the children were looking for their way back. The forest seemed more and more familiar, and at last they saw their father's house in the distance. How glad he was to see his children alive. Hansel and Gretel poured on the floor all the pearls and gems they had taken from the witch. There was no need to think about food. And they began to live, live, and rejoice. And the father drove the evil stepmother out of the house. On a small farm, in dense thickets of burdock, the mother duck found a cozy place to build her nest. She waited for the chicks to hatch. One sunny morning, the eggshells crackled and tiny fluffy ducklings were born. There was only one egg left, the largest one that did not want to crack. The duck began to worry that something was wrong with him. She sat down on the egg again and decided to wait a little longer. The duck mom gave all the heat she could. She thought that this chick must be the most beautiful since she has been incubating him for so long. Soon a chick hatched from the last egg, but it did not look like the rest of the ducklings at all. It was much larger, and its feathers were gray. The duck mom was upset to see such an ugly son. But she hoped that someday he would become like his fellows. The rest of the ducklings laughed at him. They considered him disgusting and did not want to play with him. The next morning, the mother duck went with her children to the lake. To her surprise, the ugly duckling swam as well as others. The duck then brought her little ones to the poultry yard to introduce them to society. She told the ducklings about the rules of behavior with local inhabitants. The duck presented its brood to the noblest fat drake, but he attacked the ugly duckling, and she was forced to protect her failed chick. Fat Drake ordered to drive the freak out of the yard. Mother assured that he would grow up and become like other ducklings. Unable to withstand the bullying and humiliation, the ugly duckling left the poultry yard. In search of a safer place, he came across a beautiful lake, on which there was no one. And the duckling decided to stay here to live. Time has passed. Despite his loneliness, the ugly duckling was happy that no one offends him. And then one day, a beautiful white bird with a long neck flew to his lake. The ugly duckling did not know what kind of bird it was, but he looked at it with admiration. He loved her with all his heart. How a duckling would like to be like this lovely white bird. Winter came and it started snowing. The ugly duckling saw white snow for the first time. He was delighted with this sight. But due to the fact that the winter was very snowy, it was very difficult for the duckling to find food. He had to walk around the neighborhood in search of food. He was cold and tired. So the ugly duckling got to the farmer's house. When the peasant saw a thin and unhappy chick, he felt sorry for him. The farmer decided that he would keep the duckling with him until he was fattened and matured. Spring has come. The owner took good care of the chick, and he grew up a lot. The duckling already needed a lot of space, and the farmer decided to release him to the lake. Standing on the shore of the lake, the ugly duckling looked at his reflection in the water. And he could not believe his eyes. He could not recognize himself, and thought that there was someone else behind him. And then the duckling realized that the wonderful bird in the reflection is himself. To celebrate, he thrashed and swam all over the lake from edge to edge. And suddenly he saw the same beautiful white bird with a long neck, which he had seen once before. The ugly duckling decided to swim closer to her. But the beautiful bird was not frightened, but on the contrary she smiled and winked, and together they swam across the lake. The ugly duckling couldn't believe his happiness. Passing by, a fat drake on the shore of the lake said that he had never seen such a beautiful young swan in his life. What was his surprise when he found out that the ugly duckling that he once drove from the poultry yard was a beautiful swan. It turns out that the ugly duckling was a swan from the very beginning. An egg accidentally fell into a duck's nest. And when the beautiful young swan returned home, then everyone in the poultry yard became very ashamed that they had once offended him because of his appearance.